is an SABC News presentation.
Good morning and a warm welcome as we resume our daily broadcast from the SABC's parliamentary studios in Cape Town. My name is Mkokeli Tanda. The second quarter usually marks a hectic period on the parliamentary calendar. Members of the National Assembly will devote most of its time to the budget votes of the various state departments and entities. From today up to the 31st of May, ministers will present their respective budget votes at the beginning of each sitting, while members of parliament will then be granted the opportunity to debate issues raised or not raised by the ministers. Parliamentary committees will continue doing their oversight work, including scrutinizing legislation before parliament. Today we look at two pieces of legislation. We look at the SAPS Amendment Bill, which will be high on the agenda of the Police Portfolio Committee at its meeting this morning. But we also look at the highly contested Protection of State Information Bill, which is currently being scrutinized in the National Council of Provinces. An COP ad hoc committee held special public hearings during the recess period, and we will be looking at some of the inputs during those hearings at Parliament in Cape Town. Let's now go to our first story. In 2007, at its Polokwane conference, the ANC decided that the Directorate of Special Operations, better known as the Scorpions, must go. The axe finally came down on the Scorpions in October the following year. The Corruption Fighting Unit was replaced by the Hawks, or the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigations, in terms of the newly adopted Police Amendment Act. Businessman Hugh Glenister then launched a legal battle against the move, claiming it was unconstitutional. The Constitutional Court agreed. It ruled that the SAPS Amendment Act was indeed unconstitutional on the grounds of insufficient specialization and isolation from political interference. Parliament now has to bring it in line with the Constitution. From today, the Police Portfolio Committee will be conducting a series of public hearings to get input from the public on the bill. One of those who will be facing the committee this morning is the Institute for Security Studies. We are now joined by the Cape Town head of the ISS, Henny van Vieren, and senior crime and justice researcher Chandra Gold to talk to us about their input today. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Kokeli. Thank you.
Good morning. Chandra, if I may start off with you, if you could begin with you, what exactly was the Constitutional Court ruling on the Glenister case?
Thank you very much. The Constitutional Court, in a nutcase, just ruled that the Directorate of Priority Crimes Investigation was not sufficiently insulated from political interference. So it's not sufficiently independent to meet our constitutional obligations or indeed to meet our international obligations for an anti-corruption unit. The Constitutional Court also ruled that South Africa is obliged to have a unit that is responsible for fighting crime and organized crime and corruption.
Yeah, if we could come back to you, we now have the amended legislation on the table at Parliament with 5 months remaining of its deadline set by the Concord. What is your take on the bill? What do you regard as critical flaws?
I think a concern is this bill certainly doesn't go far enough. There's been an attempt to try and deal with the Glenister judgment, which Chandra just spoke of, the decision by the Constitutional Court to guarantee independence of this anti-corruption body. Our argument is that there remain real flaws in the structure of the proposed body. Although it goes some way to meeting the constitutional requirements, it doesn't ensure that the head and deputy head will be sufficiently independent, both in terms of their appointment, in terms of their removal, in terms of the mandate of the structure, in terms of the oversight over the budget, over that structure. And I think these are just the beginning of our concerns. We believe that the Portfolio Committee needs to take seriously the concerns that are raised by civil society groups over the next few days, by the ISS and other organizations, I think, who have argued that there remain much work to be done. What the SAPS has brought today is supporting what the lawmakers have brought before our elected representatives today is only the beginning of a draft amendment bill, which we think needs much more work.
Chandra, you seem to share the sentiments expressed there. Why do you feel so strongly about the independence of a crime or corruption fighting unit?
Well, it's absolutely vital that an organization that's responsible for investigating corruption, even at the highest level of state, is able to do so without fear or favor or interference. If we're really going to be able to combat corruption, it's important that whoever's responsible for doing that can make decisions about what needs to be investigated and how it needs to be investigated, obviously keeping in mind that there are rules of the country. But it's very important that if nobody is going to be above the law, the unit needs to be independent. And particularly that means, as far as we are concerned, that the unit cannot remain within the South African Police Service.
Yes, could you live with some of the amendments to the amendments already on the table to bring the bill in line with the Constitution, or do you propose something different?
I think we certainly do propose something different. And firstly, as Chandra has just said, the location of this unit within SAPS, within the police service, is a problem. We operate within a real-world context, and we know as South Africans that we've had fundamental problems of corruption within the leadership, unfortunately, of the South African Police Service over a number of years. That means that this unit will, given the status quo, remain vulnerable to corruption, to undue influence and interference potentially. We believe that there must be clear measures taken to guarantee its independence, and we only need to think about, and specifically around its location. For example, the Independent Police Investigative Directorate is an example of a structure that's been created by our Parliament that ensures a guaranteed level of independence of an organization that investigates the abuse of power within the police. Here is an example of the type of institution I think we should be emulating, that says we can look at the matters, for example, involving the police, but at arm's length from the top structure of the police, and therefore avoiding interference by the political elite in this country.
But Chanda, if this special unit should not fall under the police, where then should it be?
I think that there are a number of options that Parliament can investigate. The one would be to establish a new statutory body, like the IPID, which used to be the Independent Complaints Directorate. It might also be possible to establish it as a unit of an existing Chapter 9 institution, such as the Auditor General, or perhaps even the Public Protector. I don't think that we need to make, I don't think it's up to us to make a firm decision or a firm recommendation. I think there are various options that Parliament can investigate, but it's not necessary for the unit to remain within the SAPS.
But in practical terms, is it really possible to have a complete independent crime or corruption fighting unit free of political interference?
I don't think that everybody is always vulnerable to political interference. We need to recognize that. I think that no human being is perfect. So therefore, the structures that our elected representatives are going to be considering in Parliament today and over the next days and months is crucial. It's about ensuring that human error, that the ability of people to have their minds changed, to be malleable to political interference, needs to be kept in check. And I think this is why the issue of independence, the need for the mandate of this body to be decided by Parliament, and for that to be part of law, the policy, for example, are all crucial aspects that need to be sufficiently resolved to ensure that it can be as free from political interference as is possible.
Chanda, you indicated earlier on that there are various options that Parliament should be looking at. But what are your views about the establishment of another Chapter 9 institution for fighting crime?
In order to secure the independence of this anti-corruption unit, we do not need to establish a new Chapter 9 institution. We've seen in the past that Chapter 9 institutions, as important as they are only as good as the people who lead them. And we would argue that there are other ways in which we can achieve independence and achieve a strong anti-corruption unit without amending the Constitution and establishing a new Chapter 9 institution.
And earlier last week or recently, the Secretary of Police, Jenny Kobeshiane, recently told the Portfolio Committee that Parliament would also be given greater powers in terms of approving Hawke's policy. How do you respond to that statement? Is that not good enough?
think it's certainly welcome. I think it's a move away from the process that we had previously under the Hawks, where a ministerial committee would make all those decisions. But there's always going to be space and room for interference from within the police, from political interference potentially. That's why I think we argue that the issues around mandate and around policy should be resolved now in Parliament. It's better to make it part of law than to make it part of regulations that will become a fight in and outside of Parliament later. Let us ensure that we seal the deal, so to speak, over the next few months. Create a unit that's sufficiently independent, its mandate is secure, and that the South African people can have confidence in that it will tackle corruption without fear or favour.
Chandra, you've made a case that it was crucial of business, both local and foreign, to take note of the legislation. Why so?
It's absolutely important for business that we create an environment in South Africa in which the rule of law applies in the first instance. In the second instance, it's important to ensure that we deal with corruption because business needs to do business in South Africa in a competitive environment. In other words, it needs to be more important that the product that you are offering the market is a quality product and you're able to deliver it efficiently than it is about who you know and who you can pay off. It's very important to ensure that the services that are ultimately delivered to South Africans are delivered by the best possible provider, not those who know the most politicians.
Finally and briefly, are you satisfied with the public participation? Is there enough public lobby?
I think we need to hear more public voices. As Chandra says, this is a concern to business, but this law is fundamental to the fight against corruption, which is in the interests of 50 million South Africans. I think we need to watch this process carefully. There needs to be space, if possible, for real public discussion and debate around this, because the consequences are far-reaching, and I think we hope that it will have a positive effect of sending a message that nobody is free from prosecution of corruption, whether they're in the business or economic elites in this country.
Finally, Chandra, whilst you're here, we'll be looking at the Protection of Information Bill later. What's your take on it?
I think it's absolutely important that we get the Protection of Information Bill right. It's important that there's a public interest clause included in it, and it's very important that the concerns of civil society are taken seriously and heard by Parliament.
Chandra and Rennie, thank you very much. We've run out of time. We have to go for a break, and when we return, we look at submissions to the NCOP's ad hoc committee on the Protection of State Information Bill. Stay with us.